Thank you. Well, actually, I would like to say a few facts. Number one, the focus by the three distinguished speakers exclusively on the situation, a humanitarian situation prevailing in Syria in terms of figures and bureaucracy does not relate to the reality. It does not relate to the reality for the following reasons. Number one, it doesn't take into consideration the political dimension of the Syrian crisis. Number two, it is somehow, here I am referring to the focus of the three distinguished speakers, it is somehow taken hostage of a unilateral vision of what's going on in Syria. And I will elaborate on each one of these points later on. Number three, it does not acknowledge the Syrian government's cooperation with all of them, such a cooperation that resulted in extremely positive results and outcomes that emanated from the signature of what we call the plan of response signed between the United Nations on one hand and the Syrian government on the other hand. Now let's go to the facts. The Syrian government, in close cooperation with Mrs. Amos, gave authorization to 11 international NGOs, humanitarian NGOs, to have access to the distribution of humanitarian assistance within the Syrian territory. And the Syrian government is currently speaking, studying, giving authorization to 3 additional international NGOs. Plus, also with close cooperation with Mrs. Amos and the Secretary General, the Syrian government allowed 111 Syrian NGOs to work in the distribution of humanitarian assistance within the Syrian territory. All the Syrian territory, without any exclusion. Plus, the OCHA representatives, as well as the international NGOs, as well as the national NGOs in Syria, all of them fulfilled 200 field visits within the Syrian territory. Here I'm elaborating a little bit on this point because it is related directly to the issue of having access, to which Mrs. Amos referred a couple minutes ago. The Syrian government has given full access to the OCHA activities in Syria in order to reach all the areas within the Syrian territory, but departing from Syria itself. This is how Damascus gave the OCHA the possibility to have access to 4 provinces in the north of Syria, very close to the Turkish-Syrian border, where humanitarian assistance were distributed to those who are in need. Mrs. Bangura was speaking about the sexual violence. As far as I'm concerned, I don't find this term very accurate. I would say sexual crimes. It's not violence. And those who perpetrate these kind of crimes should be deferred before the justice. whoever they are. And this is why the Syrian government established an official national commission to investigate all kinds of crimes, including the sexual violence against women and children. But not only that, because you have seen with me many times on the first page of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Times and the Turkish newspapers even, many photos showing kids enrolled by the armed groups in the battles. So we have other dimensions of the crisis that should be looked into with a due consideration. I said at the beginning that the focus on the humanitarian aspect does not relate to the political fact, because the unethical political program of trading in the dramatic humanitarian situation of the Syrian refugees in terms of organizing international conferences, I would call it media international conferences on pledges and donations to the so-called refugees. This is incorrect, morally speaking, because as Mrs. Amos said, and you may be aware of that, but I will show you something that I got from the site of OCHA. In black, this is the total size of the pledges. In black, this is the part that is being fulfilled, materially speaking, concretely speaking. So out of the $1.5 billion of pledges and donations uploaded in Kuwait conference, OCHA got only, according to what Mrs. Amos said, $200 million and some. But I would like to elaborate in details on this. As far as the Syrian humanitarian national response plan is concerned, meaning the money that should go to those who are in need within Syria, which is equal to the amount of $519 million out of 1.5 billion, only 20% of the pledges were paid off. Or funded up. As far as the humanitarian response plan for the Syrian refugees outside of Syria, which is equal to $1 billion according to OCHA's figures, OCHA got 19%. So these figures are extremely indicative and informative in themselves, because they show to you that what happened in Kuwait was a kind of humanitarian bazaar just for the media to show off by these Gulf states that they care a lot about the dramatic situation of Syrian refugees, either outside or the displaced persons, internally speaking, within Syria itself. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates pledged each one of them $300 million. The same day, and the conference was still going on in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia revocated its pledges, and United Arab Emirates retrieved its pledges, and Kuwait did not pay what it promised. So out of $1.5 billion, you have automatically $900 million outside. They will not be paid off. It's a kind of cinema, gentlemen. It's a kind of cinema. And here I am recalling myself and reminding you of the $4.5 billion pledges and donations that were pledged for the Palestinian people in Gaza in the Sharm el-Sheikh summit. None of these $4.5 billion was paid for the Palestinians in Gaza. None. The UNRWA schools destroyed by the Israelis in Gaza are still not reconstructed and rebuilt. So please, we need to look at the picture in its entirety very objectively. We have a humanitarian situation in Syria. Yes. We have a humanitarian crisis in Syria. Yes. We need the help of the United Nations. Yes. We signed an agreement with the UN represented by OCHA. Yes. We want OCHA to succeed. Yes. But we and you and the United Nations should all stick to the provisions of the General Assembly Resolution 46/182, which respects the sovereignty of Syria and says that not only the sovereignty of Syria, each state's sovereignty should be respected while delivering humanitarian assistance. So we are not reinventing the wheel. All what we are saying is that, please let us work together in light and in line with the provision of the General Assembly Resolution 46/182.
سؤال بالعربي. هناك دعوات كثيرة لكي يتحمل مجلس الأمن الدولي مسؤوليته حيال الأزمة السورية المتفاقمة والتي بات هناك نحو ملايين السكان السوريين يعانون من جرائها. ما هي المطالب التي ترون أن على مجلس الأمن الدولي أن يتولاها لكي يعيد الأمور إلى نصابها ويحل الأزمة السورية؟ كيف تنظرون إلى دور مجلس الأمن الدولي هنا؟
Do you want me to say it in Arabic or in English? In Arabic. قلت في بداية حديثي أن تركيز الأضواء على البعد الإنساني للأزمة السورية لا يلبي الوصف الدقيق، لا يعطي وصفا دقيقا لما يجري في سوريا. من هذه النقطة أود أن أذكر يعني من خلال إجابتي على سؤالك بأن مجلس الأمن حتى الآن وبعد مضي 2 على الأزمة في سوريا حتى الآن يتجاهل الكثير من المعطيات. طبعا بعض أعضاء مجلس الأمن يتجاهل الكثير من المعطيات الهامة التي وافيتم بها باسم حكومتي. سأعطيك مثالا على ذلك. أنا أرسلت إلى مجلس الأمن حتى الآن 300 رسالة مليئة بالمعلومات. إحدى هذه الرسائل هذه هي، وهي تتعلق بتزويد مجلس الأمن بأسماء 143 إرهابيا أجنبيا ممن قتلوا في سوريا، مع جنسياتهم، مع أسمائهم، مع تاريخ دخولهم إلى سوريا، قادمين من الحدود المجاورة لسوريا من تركيا وغيرها ولبنان والأردن. هذه الرسالة طلبت تعميمها بشكل فوري. عممت قبل 3 أيام فقط. أخذت من مجلس الأمن 3 أشهر كي توزع كوثيقة رسمية. وزعت قبل 2 أو 3 لأنها تتضمن وقائع أسماء 143 إرهابيا بالاسم وبالجنسية وبتاريخ الميلاد. لماذا تم تجاهل هذه المعلومات؟ 3 أشهر. طبعا لعلمك لم تنشر إلا بعد أن أصريت وألحيت على الأمانة العامة مرارا وتكرارا لينشروا هذه الوثيقة. أمر آخر، اليوم وكالة رويترز قالت بأن هناك شحنات من الأسلحة، أعتقد أنكم قرأتموها، أسلحة متطورة وصلت إلى المجموعات الإرهابية المسلحة عبر تركيا. وكالة رويترز اليوم. واليوم أيضا جريدة نيويورك تايمز قالت بأن السعودية مولت شحنة سلاح من كرواتيا إلى المجموعات المسلحة عبر الأردن. هذه وقائع فاكتس، هذه وقائع لم توزع من وكالة الأنباء السورية. هذه وقائع وزعت من وكالة رويترز ومن صحيفة نيويورك تايمز، لكنها وقائع مهمة وتحرج أولئك الذين يركزون فقط على اتهام الحكومة السورية. مجلس الأمن يجب أن يركز على هذه النقاط لكي يصل إلى قراءة واضحة ودقيقة لما يجري في سوريا. Please.
You mentioned a figure of $900 million that was pledged by Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and what was the third?
United Arab Emirates.
Yeah, and then the pledges were revoked. That was for humanitarian aid.
Of course, they didn't say that they revoked. It's a kind of joke. I will elaborate a little bit. That might be interesting for you. The Saudis government said the same day the conference was held, and after pledging publicly that they would pledge $300 million, they said that, guys, out of these $300 million, we have already paid almost $225 million as a humanitarian assistance, unilaterally speaking, as a humanitarian assistance to the Syrian refugees outside of Syria. So please deduct these $225 million out of the $300 million.
Do you have a figure for, this is a follow-up. Since publicly, I believe Qatar and Saudi Arabia are aiding the Syrian opposition, do you have a figure of how much money they're actually spending on that aid?
Many countries of those who gathered in Kuwait conference are the main reasons of the suffering of the Syrian refugees and displaced. They are the main reason of that because these countries are the ones who are harboring, sponsoring, training the armed groups and providing them with the media coverage to show them as struggles, as strugglers for freedom, as, you know, not as armed groups and terrorist groups who attack hospitals, schools, infrastructure, airports, shoot at civilian airlines, shoot at diplomatic missions and embassies. So these people who get the money from the Gulf states and others, including the Turkish government, are using this money and this political coverage and the training camps established on the Turkish territory and elsewhere in order to justify to the public opinion that they are indeed freedom fighters. A lot. A lot.
Ambassador, you've spoken a lot about the Kuwait conference. Can I ask you about another conference?
Please.
The conference in Rome of the Friends of Syria is going to start in a matter of hours, and there are reports that the US is going to give fresh assistance to the opposition, non-lethal assistance. What's your view on that?
Syria needs genuine, objective, impartial, unbiased assistance. Syria needs encouragement to all the parties to get involved in the national inclusive dialogue. Syria needs from those who call for this meeting to be held in Marrakesh or in Rome or in Istanbul to convince those who are supporting these armed groups to sit at the table of negotiations and the dialogue, to resolve the Syrian crisis in its comprehensiveness and by the Syrians themselves, according to the Security Council Resolution 2041, 42 and 2043, and the Geneva State Declaration. Why should people start from scratch every time, while we have these provisions and these arsenals of internationally recognized and accepted documents? Why should we go to Rome to reinvent the wheel again, while we have already invented the wheel in terms of the Security Council resolutions and in terms of the Geneva Declaration? Why Mr. Lavrov met with Mr. Kerry yesterday? To discuss how to implement the Geneva Declaration. So the Syrian people do not need further conferences such as the one you have called the Friends of Syria. If they are really the Friends of Syria, they should care for all the Syrian people, not only for part of the Syrian people, those who are refusing categorically to sit at the table of the national dialogue and calling for further destruction of the Syrian society and the Syrian state.
Would your president be prepared to consider standing down to avoid that further destruction, because he seems to be the key sticking point?
This is very naive, my friend. This is very naive what you are saying. When you sit at the table of dialogue, you don't put preconditions. You sit and you say whatever you want, but at the table of the national dialogue. It's called national dialogue. It's not called national preconditional dialogue. You sit, you say what you want. If you have the majority of the population and the people behind you, then you will impose your point of view. But if you don't have 23 million Syrians behind your version of the events, then you will not impose anything at the table of the national dialogue.
How many Syrians do you think are behind your president right now?
It's not an issue of statistics. It's an issue of sitting at the table with witnesses, UN and else, and other people, and then we will see what is your weight, morally, physically, and politically. This is what is called political settlement. Political settlement requires you to sit at the table and to accept the idea of sitting at the table with those who have different opinions than other than yours.
معالي وزير الخارجية تحدث عن استعداد السلطات في سوريا للجلوس مع المعارضة المسلحة والتفاوض حول إيجاد مخرج سياسي للأزمة. هل أنت شخصيا مستعد للجلوس مع أطراف في المعارضة موجودة في الولايات المتحدة من أجل هذه المفاوضات التي قد تؤدي إلى حل سياسي؟
أيضا هذا افتراض يعني اسمح لي بالكلمة ساذج. التفاوض يتم بين وفود مخولة. الحكومة كلفت وزير بقيادة آلية الحوار. هذا الوزير هو الذي سيجلس على طاولة الحوار ويتحدث مع الآخرين. والطرف الآخر أيضا يجب أن يفوض أو يخول ممثلين عنه لكي يفاوضوا الجانب الحكومي. المسألة ليست مسألة أشخاص أو تبرع من هذا الشخص أو ذاك، من هذا السفير أو ذاك، من هذا الوزير أو ذاك، لا. المسألة هي أن يقبل الطرفان مبدأ الحوار، مبدأ التسوية السلمية، مبدأ وقف العنف والإجرام، مبدأ احترام السيادة، ومن ثم ستجد أن هناك وفدا يمثل الحكومة ووفدا يمثل الجانب الآخر من المعارضة، يجلسون سوية على طاولة الحوار بقصد التفاهم على برنامج عمل يلبي تطلعات الشعب السوري. هذه هي الفكرة من وراء المشروع السياسي، المبادرة السياسية التي أطلقتها الحكومة السورية قبل فترة، وأعلمنا بها مجلس الأمن والأمين العام. فالمسألة هي أن يكون هناك إطار رسمي لعملية الحوار، ليس مبادرات فردية، لأنها هذه المبادرات لن توصل إلى النتيجة المبتغاة. السوري يجب أن يحاور السوري أيا كان. إذا كان الهدف إنقاذ سوريا والحفاظ على السيادة السورية، فالسوري مطلوب منه أن يحاور السوري الآخر. ولذلك خطة كوفي عنان ومن بعدها الإبراهيمي وقرارات مجلس الأمن كلها تقول مبادرة يقودها السوريون أنفسهم، ليس أحد آخر. Please.
I just want to ask you about the Security Council itself. I wanted to ask you about the press statement that was proposed on the bombings in Damascus that was ended up never being released. I don't know if I wanted to know what you thought that says about the Council, and also one of the letters that you wrote. It seems like it finally recently came out after, I don't know, maybe it's 3 months.
3 months.
What do you think is behind that? Is that the Secretariat responsible? Is it the Council? What led to that from your point of view?
There might be some hidden hands here and there who do not have interest in publicizing these very important facts provided by the Syrian government. When I provide an official letter and including 143 names of 143 international terrorists killed on the Syrian territory, and I ask the Secretariat and the Security Council to publish and distribute this document officially urgently, and it takes 3 months to do that, that means something is wrong. Something is wrong in the process as well as in the substance. But this is number one. Number two, related to your question on the press statement. So far, I'm really sorry to say that 8 suicide bombings that took place in Damascus, Aleppo, and other cities in Syria were a matter of deep discussion in the Council, and some friendly delegations in the Council prepared draft statement condemning these terrorist attacks. On these 8 occasions, other members in the Council objected to the issuance of just a press statement condemning the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Al-Qaeda elements in Syria. What does that mean? I leave it up to you.
How many opposed? Did only the U.S. oppose? Russia put out a press statement saying it was the U.S. Was there more? UK,
it's as we say in the social language, it's a division of labor. One day the delegation of Britain, the other day delegation of France, then the delegation of USA. Germany used to be very active before they left the Council in objecting to the issuance of this press statement. I'm talking about issuing press statement. Some members objected to this, while they acknowledged that the perpetrators were from Al-Qaeda and Jabhat al-Nusra. So something is wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.